At my mother's retirement party, she stood up and said, "I raised two amazing children and one regret." Everyone laughed. My sister shouted, "At least she's finally saying it out loud." I just smiled, took the microphone, and said, "Then you won't mind if I share my gift first." 10 seconds later, the screen lit up, and my mother's smile disappeared completely. I, 34 thought I was prepared for whatever Mom might say at her retirement party. After 35 years as a high school principal, she'd earned the right to speak her mind. What I wasn't prepared for was becoming the punchline. The community center buzzed with colleagues, neighbors, and family friends. Mom stood at the podium, radiant in her navy dress, surveying the crowd with that familiar, authoritative smile. She'd always commanded attention effortlessly, and tonight was no different. She began with the usual pleasantries, thanking everyone for coming, reflecting on her career. Then her tone shifted slightly, becoming more personal. She talked about balancing work and motherhood, about the challenges of raising 3 children while building her career. That's when she delivered the line that would change everything. She paused, smiled that practiced smile, and announced that she'd raised 2 amazing children and one regret. The room erupted in laughter. People assumed it was just her dry humor, the same wit that had made her popular with students and staff alike. My sister immediately jumped up from her table near the front, practically bouncing with vindication. She shouted that Mom was finally saying it out loud, like this was some long-awaited acknowledgement of what everyone supposedly knew. The laughter grew louder. Heads turned toward me, some with knowing smirks, others with uncomfortable sympathy. My wife reached for my hand under the table, her grip tight with concern. My kids, thankfully too young to fully understand, continued coloring on their napkins. I felt that familiar sensation I'd known since childhood, the weight of being the family disappointment. The one who'd chosen teaching over law school. The one who'd married young instead of pursuing the corporate career Mom had mapped out. The one whose modest suburban house paled next to my siblings' achievements. But here's what nobody knew. I'd been expecting this moment for months. I stood up slowly, letting the laughter die down naturally. All eyes shifted to me as I made my way to the front of the room. Mom looked puzzled but pleased, probably assuming I was about to deliver some self-deprecating response that would cement her joke. I took the microphone gently from her hands and smiled at the crowd. My voice was steady when I spoke, telling everyone that since Mom was being so honest tonight, she probably wouldn't mind if I shared my gift first. The room fell silent. Mom's expression shifted from amusement to confusion. She clearly hadn't expected me to take control of the narrative. I pulled out a small remote from my jacket pocket and clicked it once. The large screen behind the podium flickered to life, and then my mother's smile disappeared completely. The first image showed a bank statement. Not just any bank statement. One from the college fund she'd set up for my youngest brother 20 years ago. The same fund she'd claimed was depleted when he graduated, forcing him to take out massive student loans. The balance showed $127,000. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Mom stepped toward me, her hand reaching for the microphone, but I moved away smoothly, clicking to the next slide. Property records. 3 rental properties purchased over the past decade, all in my mother's name. Properties that generated substantial monthly income. Income she'd never mentioned while complaining about retirement finances and asking my siblings and me for occasional loans. The third slide showed email correspondence between Mom and my brother's ex-wife. Messages dated from 2 years ago, right around the time of his divorce. Messages where Mom offered to help pay for the ex-wife's legal fees. The same ex-wife who'd walked away with half of everything my brother had worked for. But it was the fourth slide that made several people gasp. Insurance documents. A life insurance policy on my father, who'd passed away 8 years earlier. A policy Mom had claimed didn't exist when we'd struggled with funeral expenses and medical debt. A policy worth $300,000 that she'd quietly collected while watching us scrape together money for Dad's headstone. I let each image sink in, watching the room's energy shift from entertainment to discomfort to something approaching shock. Mom's face had gone completely pale. She kept reaching toward me, trying to interrupt, but I maintained just enough distance to continue. My sister had stopped smiling. She was staring at the screen with the same confused expression she'd worn as a child when her certainties were challenged. My brother, who'd been laughing the loudest earlier, now sat frozen at his table. I addressed the room directly, explaining that I'd discovered these documents over the past 6 months while helping Mom organize her affairs for retirement. She'd asked me to handle some paperwork, trusting that her disappointment of a son would simply do as instructed without asking questions. But I had asked questions. Lots of them. The fifth slide showed receipts from luxury vacations taken over the past 5 years. Cruises to Alaska, tours through Europe, a month-long stay in Hawaii, all while she declined family gatherings due to financial constraints and accepted monetary gifts from her children for birthdays and holidays. I mentioned how she'd missed my daughter's birthday party last year, claiming she couldn't afford the plane ticket. The receipt on screen showed she'd been in Tuscany that same week. The room had gone completely silent now. The only sound was the air conditioning humming overhead and the occasional clink of glasses as people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The sixth slide was perhaps the most damaging. Correspondence with a financial advisor about establishing trust for my siblings while explicitly excluding me. Notes in Mom's handwriting detailing how to structure the inheritance to minimize my access to family assets. I read one line aloud, her own words written in blue ink. He's proven he can't be trusted with important decisions. Better to protect the family's future. Mom finally found her voice and demanded I stop this immediately. She said I was embarrassing myself and everyone else. She tried to frame this as an invasion of her privacy, a betrayal of her trust. I reminded the room that she'd just publicly declared me her regret in front of everyone we both knew. I suggested that perhaps we were both guilty of poor timing. The final slide was a letter I'd written but never sent. A letter detailing years of small cruelties, casual dismissals, and systematic exclusion from family financial discussions despite being the only child with actual financial training. A letter explaining how I'd spent my adult life trying to earn approval that was apparently never available. But I didn't read it aloud. Instead, I told the room that families were complicated, that sometimes love got tangled up with disappointment and unfair expectations. I looked directly at Mom and said that while she might consider me her regret, I'd learned to consider myself her greatest success, not because of what she'd taught me intentionally, but because of what she'd taught me accidentally. I'd learned independence. I'd learned to build my own security instead of waiting for handouts. I'd learned that integrity mattered more than approval. Most importantly, I'd learned how not to treat my own children. I handed her back the microphone and returned to my table. The room remained silent for what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 seconds. Mom stood at the podium, visibly shaken, staring at the screen that still displayed my unmailed letter. She tried to regain control, to salvage the evening, but her voice cracked when she spoke. She announced that perhaps it was time for cake and dismissed the formal program. People began moving around awkwardly, some approaching me with uncomfortable sympathy, others clearly unsure how to process what they'd witnessed. My sister appeared at my elbow within minutes, demanding to know where I'd gotten those documents and whether everything was real. She seemed less concerned about the revelation itself and more worried about how it affected her own standing. I confirmed that everything was legitimate and that I had copies of all supporting documentation. I also mentioned that I'd already consulted with an attorney about the insurance policy and property issues, not because I wanted to cause problems, but because I'd needed to understand my legal position. My brother approached more cautiously. He asked directly whether Mom had really helped fund his ex-wife's legal team. When I confirmed it, something shifted in his expression, a recognition that perhaps the divorce hadn't unfolded as randomly as he'd believed. The party continued for another hour, but the atmosphere had fundamentally changed. People clustered in small groups, whispering and glancing toward our family. Mom moved through the room mechanically, accepting congratulations on her retirement with none of her earlier warmth. As we prepared to leave, Mom cornered me near the coat check. She was angry now, the shock having transformed into familiar fury. She accused me of planning this ambush, of deliberately humiliating her on what should have been a celebration of her career. I reminded her that she'd started the evening by publicly calling me her regret. I suggested that perhaps we both needed to reflect on how we'd reached this point. She demanded I return all the documents and never speak about this again. She threatened to cut me out of the will entirely, as if that hadn't already been her plan. I told her the documents were copies and that I'd already secured the originals in appropriate places. I also mentioned that inheritance had never been my motivation. I'd built my own life without counting on her money. Then I said something that surprised even me. I told her I forgave her, not because she deserved forgiveness, and not because what she'd done was acceptable, but because I was tired of carrying the weight of her disapproval. I was tired of trying to earn love that came with conditions I could never meet. I gathered my wife and kids, said goodbye to the relatives who weren't actively avoiding me, and left my mother's retirement party for the last time. Update 1. The fallout began within days. My phone rang constantly with calls from relatives, family friends, and even some of Mom's former colleagues. The reactions split predictably along family lines. My aunt called to tell me I destroyed Mom's reputation and embarrassed the entire family. She insisted there had to be reasonable explanations for everything and that I should have handled this privately. But my uncle, Dad's brother, called with a different perspective. He'd always suspected something was wrong with the insurance situation after Dad died. He'd offered to help with expenses at the time, and Mom had declined while appearing genuinely distressed about money. Learning about the policy confirmed suspicions he'd carried for years. My sister went into full damage control mode. She started calling extended family members to provide her own narrative about the situation. In her version, I'd become vindictive and jealous of her success, manufacturing drama to hurt Mom. But my brother surprised me. He called 3 days after the party and asked to meet for coffee. He'd been doing his own investigation since the revelation about his divorce. He'd contacted his ex-wife directly and confirmed that yes, Mom had provided financial assistance for legal fees. More than that, Mom had actively encouraged the ex-wife to push for a more aggressive settlement, suggesting that my brother had hidden assets that didn't exist. The betrayal had shaken him more deeply than the financial revelations. He'd trusted Mom's advice throughout the divorce proceedings, believing she was helping him navigate a difficult situation. Instead, she'd been actively working against his interests while appearing supportive to his face. He apologized for laughing at the retirement party and admitted he'd participated in the family dynamic that positioned me as the disappointing child. He'd never questioned it because it had benefited him. He'd enjoyed being one of the successful children without examining what that designation cost me. We talked for 3 hours. He shared stories I'd never heard about pressure he'd felt to maintain Mom's approval, decisions he'd made not because he wanted to, but because they aligned with her expectations. We'd both been shaped by her need to control our narratives, just in different ways. 2 weeks after the party, Mom called me directly for the first time since that night. She didn't apologize, but she also didn't attack. Instead, she proposed we meet to discuss the situation like adults. I agreed, but only with my wife present and only in a public place. I'd learned not to trust private conversations with Mom about sensitive topics. We met at a restaurant downtown. Mom had prepared, bringing her own documentation and explanations for each revelation from the retirement party. The college fund money was being preserved for my brother's children, she claimed. The rental properties were investments for the family's future. The insurance money had been used for expenses I didn't know about. But when pressed for specifics, her explanations became vague and contradictory. She couldn't explain why she'd asked for loans while sitting on substantial assets, or why she'd excluded me from inheritance planning, or why she'd interfered in my brother's divorce. Finally, she shifted tactics entirely. She accused me of being ungrateful for everything she'd provided throughout my childhood. She listed sacrifices she'd made, opportunities she'd created for me, ways she'd supported me that I'd apparently forgotten. I listened without interrupting, then asked her a single question. Did she love me? The question clearly caught her off guard. She stammered about love being more complex than simple emotions, about tough love, about preparing children for reality. I pressed the point. I asked if she was proud of the man I'd become, the husband I was to my wife, the father I was to my children. She couldn't answer directly. Instead, she talked about potential I'd wasted, choices I'd made that disappointed her, ways I could still change to become someone she could fully support. That's when I realized the truth I'd been avoiding for decades. Mom didn't love me as I was. She loved a version of me that had never existed, a version that made choices she approved of, achieved success she could claim credit for, and remained dependent on her guidance and approval. The actual me, the person sitting across from her, was indeed her regret, not because I'd failed at life, but because I'd succeeded on my own terms instead of hers. I stood up to leave, and she grabbed my arm. For the first time, she looked genuinely frightened. She asked what I wanted from her, what it would take to fix this. I told her I wanted nothing. I'd already gotten what I needed. The truth, finally out in the open where we could all see it clearly. Update 2. 6 months have passed since the retirement party. The family dynamics have shifted in ways I never anticipated. My relationship with my brother has strengthened considerably. We talk regularly now, comparing notes on childhood experiences and supporting each other through the process of redefining our relationship with Mom. He's also made significant changes in his own life. He reconciled with his ex-wife, not romantically, but they've established better communication about their children. Understanding Mom's interference helped them both realize how outside manipulation had poisoned their divorce proceedings. My sister remains Mom's staunchest defender, but cracks have appeared in that alliance too. She called me 2 months ago, furious that Mom had refused to help with her daughter's wedding expenses. The same woman who'd hidden substantial assets while accepting gift money from her children had suddenly become protective of her finances when asked to contribute to her granddaughter's celebration. The conversation revealed that my sister had also discovered some financial inconsistencies in her interactions with Mom. Nothing as dramatic as what I'd uncovered, but enough to plant seeds of doubt about Mom's complete honesty in financial matters. Mom herself has largely withdrawn from family interactions. She declined Christmas dinner at my brother's house and has been notably absent from grandchildren's birthday parties and school events. She did reach out once more, through my aunt, suggesting family counseling to repair the damage I'd caused. I declined through the same intermediary, explaining that I was perfectly satisfied with my current family relationships and saw no damage that required repair. My own family has grown closer through this experience. My wife, who'd watched me struggle with family dynamics for our entire marriage, has expressed relief that the pretense is finally over. She no longer has to help me manage the emotional aftermath of family gatherings or watch me try to earn approval that was never available. My children, still young enough to be shielded from most details, simply know that we don't see Grandma as often anymore. They've adapted easily, as children do, and seem happier at family gatherings that no longer carry undercurrents of tension and judgment. The most unexpected outcome has been the response from extended family and family friends. Several people reached out privately to share their own experiences with Mom's behavior. Instances of manipulation, financial irregularities, or just general controlling behavior that they'd witnessed but never felt comfortable addressing. Apparently, my public revelation had given others permission to acknowledge what they'd observed privately. The retirement party incident became a catalyst for broader conversations about family dynamics and the cost of maintaining appearances at the expense of authentic relationships. I returned to work the Monday after the party and found that the story had spread through my school community as well. Rather than judgment, I received surprising support from colleagues who recognized the courage it had taken to speak truth publicly. One older teacher, nearing her own retirement, told me she wished she'd had my strength when dealing with her own difficult family dynamics. She'd spent decades managing relationships that drained her energy and compromised her integrity, always choosing peace over truth. The principal called me into her office that first week, concerned about potential drama affecting my classroom performance. But after hearing my account of events, she expressed admiration for how I'd handled a complex family situation while maintaining professionalism and dignity. My therapy sessions during this period focused on processing decades of accumulated emotional damage and learning to trust my own perceptions about relationships and boundaries. I'd spent so long adapting to Mom's version of reality that rebuilding confidence in my own judgment took considerable work. The therapist helped me understand that children of controlling parents often develop hypervigilance about others' emotions and needs while losing touch with their own. I'd become expert at reading Mom's moods and adjusting my behavior accordingly, but I'd never learned to prioritize my own emotional well-being in relationships. Looking back now, I realized the retirement party wasn't really about revenge. It was about finally refusing to participate in a narrative that diminished my worth and integrity. It was about choosing truth over family peace, authenticity over approval. Some people have criticized my methods, suggesting I could have addressed these issues privately rather than creating public embarrassment. But private conversations with Mom had never yielded honest responses or genuine change. She was too skilled at deflection, manipulation, and reframing narratives to her advantage. The public setting forced accountability that private discussions never could have achieved. It also prevented her from gaslighting me about what had been said or agreed upon, something that had happened countless times in our previous interactions. Update 3. A year has passed since that pivotal evening. The family landscape has stabilized into a new configuration that feels healthier for everyone involved. My brother and I maintain regular contact and have developed genuine friendship for the first time in our adult lives. Our children play together regularly, and our wives have become close friends. We've created our own family traditions that don't require navigating mom's approval or control. My sister has gradually pulled back from her defensive position regarding mom. She hasn't apologized directly, but she stopped actively attacking my character to other family members. More tellingly, she's established clearer boundaries with mom around financial matters and child-rearing advice. Last month, she called to ask my opinion about a job opportunity, the first time she'd ever sought my counsel on an important decision. The conversation felt tentative but genuine, like she was testing whether reconciliation might be possible between us. Mom remains largely isolated from family activities. She's developed new friendships through her retirement community and seems to be building a life that doesn't revolve around controlling her adult children's choices. Occasionally, I hear updates through relatives. She's apparently taken up painting and volunteers at a local animal shelter. These activities seem to provide the sense of purpose and recognition she'd previously sought through managing our lives. She sent a birthday card to my daughter this year, the first direct communication she'd initiated since our restaurant meeting. The card was simple and appropriate, with no manipulation or guilt-inducing messages. I chose to view it as a small step toward accepting boundaries rather than trying to circumvent them. My own children have thrived without the confusing dynamics that had characterized previous family gatherings. They're developing authentic relationships with the relatives who matter, without having to navigate the emotional minefields that had defined my own childhood. My daughter, now 7, has started asking occasional questions about why we don't see grandma very often. I've explained in age-appropriate terms that sometimes adults have disagreements that take time to resolve, and that all the people who love her are still in her life in different ways. Professionally, the experience has made me a better teacher and mentor. Having faced my own family's dysfunctional patterns, I'm more attuned to students who might be struggling with similar dynamics at home. I've been able to offer support and perspective that I couldn't have provided before understanding these issues in my own life. The financial revelations have been largely resolved through legal channels. The insurance matter required probate court intervention, but resulted in appropriate distribution of assets that should have been handled years earlier. My siblings and I split the proceeds equally, as Dad would have wanted. The rental properties remain in Mom's control, which is appropriate since she purchased them with her own funds. However, the transparency about their existence has ended the pattern of financial manipulation that had characterized our adult relationships. Most importantly, I've learned to trust my own perceptions and judgments about relationships. I no longer second-guess my reactions to manipulative behavior or rationalize away red flags in personal interactions. The retirement party represents a turning point where I stopped trying to earn love from someone who wasn't capable of offering it authentically. Instead, I focused on nurturing the relationships that did support mutual respect and genuine affection. My marriage has deepened considerably. My wife no longer has to watch me struggle with family dynamics that undermine my confidence and emotional stability. We've been able to focus our energy on building our own family culture based on honesty, respect, and unconditional love. Some extended family members still believe I handled the situation too harshly or publicly, but their opinions matter less now that I understand the difference between keeping peace and enabling dysfunction. The people whose opinions I value have expressed respect for the courage it took to speak truth in a difficult situation. They understand that sometimes love requires setting boundaries that feel harsh but protect everyone's long-term well-being. If I encountered this situation again, I might handle some details differently, but I wouldn't change the fundamental decision to stop accepting treatment that diminished my worth and integrity. That choice has led to a more authentic and peaceful life for my entire family.